We know the knight as a symbol of chivalry, shining armor, fearless heart, and a sword raised for honor. Lies a journey of hardship, obedience, and danger. We will uncover the brutal reality of becoming a medieval knight from innocent boyhood to a warrior in waiting. Today we're glimpsing into the life of a medieval knight. This is the untold story of the making of a medieval knight. Subscribe for more deep dives into medieval history and let us know in the comments what part of a knight's life you'd like to explore next. The life of a knight began long before he ever touched a sword. Born typically into a noble family, a future knight spent his early years up to about age 7 at home. There, he learned the basics of etiquette and manners from his parents and household staff. He was taught how to speak respectfully, how to act with dignity, and most importantly, how to obey without question. But childhood in the medieval world wasn't filled with toys and play. Every lesson was about preparing the young boy for a life of service, hardship, and discipline. At 7 years old, the boy left home to begin his first official step toward knighthood, becoming a page. He would be sent to live in the castle or household of another noble lord of him, someone of higher standing than his own family. The life of a page was filled with thankless chores and exhausting responsibilities. From cleaning up after animals and caring for horses, to serving meals in the great hall, every day was work. These tasks weren't just chores, they were lessons in obedience, humility, and duty. A knight was expected to serve loyally, and that lesson started young. But the page wasn't just a servant, he was a student. Every day was split between chores and basic combat training. Armed with wooden swords, boys would train in mock battles. Though harmless in theory, these training sessions left many bruises and even more lessons. They also learned to hunt, developing skills in tracking, riding, and survival. And when they weren't in the field or stables, they were in the study at least, some of them. Reading, writing, and Latin were often taught by a local chaplain, but not all pages were lucky enough to be educated. Many knights never learned to read or write, relying on scribes later in life. For those who did study, learning Latin wasn't about speaking it, was about understanding religious texts, law, and history. It set apart those who could lead from those who could only follow. Because a knight wasn't just a warrior. He was a symbol of loyalty, strength, and service to his lord and his land. As a page, he learned to serve without question, to honor his duty above all else. His years were not glorious, but they were foundational. Before a knight could wield a sword in battle, he had to learn to control himself. And that journey began with sweeping floors and cleaning stables. At age of 14, the boy was assigned to serve a real knight. This wasn't school, it was life or death. The squire was the knight's shadow, his intern, his assistant, his student. He learned to ride powerful war horses, but only after falling many times. Every tumble taught him how to control these beasts and survive a charge. He trained with real swords now, jousting, wrestling, archery, swimming, dancing. A knight had to move with grace in armor and in court. He also learned the weight of duty. Squire cleaned and polished his knight's armor. One mistake, one loose buckle could mean the knight's death in battle. If that happened, the squire would face severe punishment. Or worse. He had to care for the knight's injuries, tend to him after tourneys, and accompany him into real combat. One misstep, one wrong move, could land both of them in the afterlife. Being a squire wasn't just about learning, it was about surviving. He witnessed battles firsthand. He saw friends fall, and if his knight died, it was the squire who gave him a burial of honor, sometimes crafting an effigy of the knight on his grave. He lived every day in the shadow of death, learning what it truly meant to serve. This wasn't a game, it was a grueling apprenticeship. A knight in training whose mistakes had real consequences. It wasn't just his future at risk, it was his life. At the peak age of 21, a squire's dream finally comes true. A boy who served, trained, and bled finally becomes a knight. Not everyone became a knight. Some were knighted on the battlefield after showing extraordinary valor. Others were promoted through political favor, often as a reward from a lord to someone loyal. Squires were knighted at weddings, Easter, Christmas, occasions that brought people together to witness a sacred transformation. The night before, the squire would fast, bathe, pray alone, reflecting on what his life would now belong to: his noble lord, his honor, and the code of chivalry. Come morning, he'd kneel, he'd swear an oath of loyalty, he'd be tapped with a sword, and rise as a knight. From that day forward, a knight's life was not his own. He was a bodyguard, a soldier, a symbol of order. His duty, to serve his lord, fight in his wars, and protect his land. Knighthood wasn't only about war, it was about work. In times of peace, he managed estates, settled disputes, and kept peasants in check. If a village revolted, the knight rode out to restore order. He took complaints, enforced laws, and ensured taxes were paid. And when needed, he trained the next generation of squires, restarting the cycle of knighthood. But peace never lasted. Knights were warriors first, and that meant battle campaigns long. Grueling journeys across muddy terrain, snowy mountains, or enemy territory. Armor weighed between 60 and 110 pounds. Riding for hours through mud, rain, and snow was common. They slept in the dirt or in piles of hay if they were lucky. Food was dried meat, stale bread, and sometimes just scraps. There were no baths, only lice, flies, and cold steel. And when battle came, it was chaotic, noisy, disorienting, and deadly. It was hard to tell friend from foe, especially in the heat of the fight. Knights could die, unrecognized, unburied, and forgotten. When the sword was sheathed, a knight's life didn't slow down. If he survived the battlefield, he returned home. To responsibility. He had to manage his lands, deal with villagers, and train squires. He was a symbol of stability, expected to uphold the traditions of knighthood and justice. The knight wasn't always feared. He was sometimes loved, other times resented by the peasants who worked the land he protected or exploited. His world was duty. Even during rest, he was working. If a knight was lucky, very lucky, he would not fall on the battlefield. He'd grow old. And in the end, die peacefully in bed, under a roof, surrounded by family or comrades. For those rare knights, their deaths were honored. Some had elaborate burials, even effigies carved into stone to mark their resting place. Statues of them lying in armor, hands in prayer, eternal symbols of their service. But most simply faded away. The reward for all that suffering, glory, wealth, power, comfort, this is what awaited a successful knight at the top of the medieval world. Becoming a knight wasn't just an honor, it was a ticket to the top. In the rigid medieval hierarchy, knights sat just below nobility. They held status, commanded respect, and often owned vast lands. They could attend court, influence politics, and lead men into battle or collect taxes from the peasants below them. They were envied, admired, and sometimes feared. A knight wasn't just a soldier, he was a symbol of power and prestige. Fashion was a statement of status. While peasants wore rough wool and linen, knights could afford luxurious fabrics, velvet, silk, and elaborately embroidered tunics. Their clothing was bright, flashy, and designed to make them instantly recognizably and off the battlefield. At the table, they feasted like kings. Roasted beef and mutton, cheese, bread and butter, and lots of alcohol. Wine, ale, and mead flowed freely. So freely, in fact, that drunken, unruly behavior was common even among the most respected knights. At night, they slept in shifts. Comfort was relative, but compared to the dirt and hay of a battlefield campaign, even a stone bed in a castle felt luxurious. Knights weren't just warriors, they were celebrities. They became the heroes of ballads, epic poems, and courtly tales. Bards would sing of their valor, women would write of their beauty, and children would dream of riding beside them. But behind the fame, there were still flaws and fragility. Their armor, though impressive, was heavy, ranging from 60 to 110 pounds. And in battle, it could actually slow them down, making them vulnerable and sometimes costing them everything. In between battles, knights attended tournaments where armor clashed, lances shattered, and legends were born. Tournaments, or hastiludes, were medieval sporting events designed by knights for knights. But don't think of them as simple contests. These were exclusive, elite, noble-only gatherings, packed with pageantry, politics, and potential. And more than that, they were essential training for real battle, allowing knights to hone their combat skills, earn wealth and prizes, gain public fame, and even court noble ladies. Tournaments included melees, tupanar, and joust. Melee was organized chaos a giant, free-for-all brawl between dozens, sometimes hundreds of knights. Armored warriors charging, clashing, and swinging swords, all for glory. Though often brutal, it was seen as group combat training for the battlefield. Tupanar was a duel between two knights. Knights scored points by clean hits to certain parts of the body, such as shoulder, helmet, or even knocking your opponent to the ground. These duels weren't always about knocking someone out, they were about skill, control, and precision. Unlike the melee, the tupanar was personal. An opportunity to prove your worth in front of lords, ladies, and rivals. The most romanticized of the tournament was joust, an event between two knights on warhouse carrying wooden lances. They raced toward each other, full speed, aiming to strike the shield, break a lance, or knock their opponent clean off the horse. Jousts were loud, violent, dazzling, and the crowds loved it. Each hit scored points, especially if the lance shattered on impact. A full dismount? That was a crowning moment of triumph. It was an art of precision, speed, bravery, and flair. Tournaments weren't just sport, they were society on display. Knights would parade around the castle, fully armored, flying their heraldic banners, their family colors on display. They were walking symbols of pride and lineage. Noble women would watch from towers and balconies, evaluating both form and flair. Winners earned money, favors, and the attention of high-born ladies. It wasn't uncommon for knights to flirt through feats of strength or to dedicate their victory to a specific lady. A knight didn't exist in a vacuum. He was part of a feudal system, a web of loyalty, land, and power. A knight would swear fealty to a lord, who in turn served a king. In return, the knight was given landed, with its status. Knighthood wasn't just earned through valor, had to be funded. And often, it became hereditary, passed from father to son, along with titles and land. It was a noble class, built on blood and obligation. When we hear about knights, we think about chivalry. Knights' chivalry wasn't holding doors open or courtship, but a code of conduct on how the knight was meant to live. It was about moral integrity, self-control, and sacrifice. Chivalry's code of conduct was protecting the weak, serving the realm and the church. Loyalty to one's lord, never harming the innocent, never stealing or betraying trust. Today, the image of the knight lives on in stories, films, and legends. While the real knights of the Middle Ages lived lives of discipline, danger, and duty, their legacy still inspires our vision of honor and heroism. From the page's first lesson to the final charge on the battlefield, the medieval knight's life was never simple. But it was, without question, unforgettable. Subscribe for more deep dives into medieval history and let us know in the comments what part of a knight's life you'd like to explore next.